here Tuesday with us. I think being a student activist is interesting for me, and I think everybody has a different way of approaching it. But for me, I'm not from Denver. I'm from St. Charles, Missouri, which is a suburb of St. Louis, about 20 minutes away from Ferguson. And so coming to Denver for college, I decided that I wanted to be involved in the community. I didn't want to just stay within the square of Regis. I wanted to get out there and be a part of the community that our university is in. And so I did that. And I met people who are doing work here in immigration, in anti-prison organizing, in anti-police brutality organizing, and got involved in all of that. And I think that led me to build community in Denver outside of Regis, to have friends and comrades who are a part of Regis, who are part of this Denver community and committed to working for justice within it. Working with some member of a group, Denver Community Defense Committee, just started a few months back, and we kind of came out of this group, Justice for Ryan Ronquillo, and Ryan was a 20-year-old Chicano youth here in Denver who was murdered by Denver police on July 2nd at Romero Funeral Home, just a few blocks away. And we worked very purposefully with the family and for the family, raising money for Ryan's funeral, his burial. And then the police in Denver kept killing people. So we kept raising money and paying for funerals for Jessica Hernandez, a 17-year-old Mexicana girl who was killed over in the Park Hill neighborhood. And so, because it's not just Ryan, we became Denver Community Defense Committee. And we're about exactly that, building communities that can defend themselves, building strong communities that don't need the police, that can fend for themselves, protect each other, because that's what community is, people being safe together. So, my experience with civil disobedience is interesting. Peace and Justice Studies major, so we learned all about it. Read Gandhi, read King, Letter from Birmingham Jail, read all this stuff about nonviolence and civil disobedience, and refusal, things like that. So finally decided to put my academic knowledge into action and make my little cardboard sign and put on my Regis hoodie and go sit in front of a Christmas parade. And you know, it's funny because people get really agitated when you disrupt their Christmas parade. I'm told that I ruined Christmas, that I shouldn't be sitting down in front of children. You know, think of the kids, that was a good one. Lots of other things that I wouldn't want to repeat in front of any of you. And then I went to jail for 9 hours, and luckily a good friend of mine bailed me out, and I got to go home at 3 in the morning, and then face the charges from that. But I also was on the Denver Post, and people got the message that Denver doesn't just let people kill kids, doesn't let the police kill people based on their skin color, or their ethnicity, or the language they speak, or how much money they have. We don't take it laying down. Some of us take it sitting down in the street, but we also take it standing up and marching to police stations and banging on doors and demanding that they stop doing this. And you know, I think if me getting arrested made somebody at that parade or someone who read the Denver Post the next day think, oh wait, maybe this isn't right, if this, you know, white college boy is willing to go give up a few hours of his freedom and a year on probation, then it's worth it.
Thank you. Just to give a little more context in the families that we're speaking of Ryan Ronquillo and Jessica Hernandez, before we move on to our next question. I just wanted to continue by giving some background. So on July 2nd, 2014, Ryan Ronquillo was attending the funeral of a recently deceased friend at Romero Funeral Home, just right around the corner from here. Throughout the day, 2 unmarked police cars had followed Ryan. At the funeral, Ryan left briefly to his car, where 2 police cars came and blocked the front of him, as well as another police vehicle directly behind him. According to multiple reports, Ryan then placed the vehicle into reverse, and the police car behind him immediately opened fire. Ryan's car then went forward, and the 2 officers in front of him also opened fire. According to the Denver Post, there were a total of 12 shots fired. Since this event, Ryan's family has committed themselves to seeking justice for the loss of their son and brother to police violence. For Jessica Hernandez, she was killed by Denver police in Park Hill on January 26th of 2015. Jessie was driving with 4 of her other friends in the vehicle, all under the age of 18. The Denver police claimed that they were responding to a call that the vehicle was stolen. 2 police cars then blocked off Jessie's vehicle in an alley. The police then stepped out of their cars with firearms in hand. According to an anonymous eyewitness, the Denver police began to shoot at Jessie multiple times, which is what caused Jessie to lose control of the car, making it move forward, and allegedly hitting the police officer. Jessie was shot a total of 20 times. Even after she had been shot, the Denver police removed her body from the car, placed her face down on the ground, and handcuffed her. Since this event, the family of Jessie Hernandez has taken action in the community and has received local and national support. The Hernandez family has called for a federal investigation to find the truth of the death of their daughter and sister. So with that kind of background information, Connor, my next question for you is, what has involvement and support looked like for the families in your activism and in your work?
Yeah, so both of these kids who were killed by the police, younger than me, when Jessie was in high school, Ryan was college age. And so I think, that's hard. These are children that are being killed by the police. And working with their families is hard because I don't have that same experience, I don't. And, both Ryan and Jessie faced a lot of harassment from the police while they were alive. I've talked to Ryan's mom, April, about him getting followed by the police as he's walking home from school when he was 12 years old, getting picked up, taken downtown, taken back, just over petty, meaningless things, They basically harassed him, and in the end they killed him. And Jessie, the same thing, she was beaten pretty severely by the police when she was 15 years old, I believe. And it's just a pattern of repression against brown youth in this community. And so working with their families, you have to be mindful of all of that. And that this isn't some one-off incident that's happened. This is a cycle and a pattern of violence that they've faced. And that is the ultimate violence of taking their children, taking their sibling. The work that we do at DCGC with the families is all about putting the families first forward, doing what the family asks us to do, presenting them with a variety of strategies, and then going with what they want to do. Finding them lawyers, helping them pay for funerals and burials, and then also getting their voice out there. And when they do go have a meeting with investigators, or when they are talking to the media, being there and showing that this community supports. These aren't just one-off people who have lost their children and the story is just going to die, but that all of these struggles are united, and that there's a backing force of people who haven't lost their kids, but are still going to be out there every single day working with them or working for them and doing whatever it is, whether it's finding an attorney for them to file a civil suit or getting gift cards to go buy groceries or whatever it is they need. Recently we found out that Ryan's father might be losing the house that he lives in, going into foreclosure, and we started a fundraiser for that. It's not about, we met because they faced this violence from the police, but that's not all we're there to do. We're with them in struggle forever now.
Thank you. Jamoke, I just wanted to ask you, what is the role of Denver Freedom Riders in relation to these kinds of stories in our local community, and what have you learned from Ferguson that helps you to approach this, or what are those kinds of strategies that you use to move forward?
Denver Freedom Riders exists as a network of folks who, many of us who had spent time in Ferguson, done some organizing on the ground, or looked up at news headlines and realized that we couldn't stay here in Denver when the fight was happening nationally somewhere else. And so we're not like a formal C3 or C4, but we're a group of concerned citizens. Most of us under 30, most of us Black, who've experienced much of this stuff in our own daily lives. I think that our role is one to take back a lot of the community that we learned in Ferguson, a lot of the tactics that we learned in Ferguson. I spent a couple of days with a group of young people named calling themselves the Lost Voices, who decided they were going to camp out every day in the back of a parking lot in resistance to what was happening in Ferguson. I spent days outside of the police headquarters, I guess is what you would call it, outside Ferguson, hanging out with folks. I got off the plane and I was immediately welcoming people's houses to talk about Cop Watch Canfield. So bringing some of those things that we learned in Ferguson back to Denver and putting it together, having a long-term strategy and plan for what does it really mean when we say if we don't get it, shut it down. Right? If we don't get justice, what are we really planning on shutting down? Is it enough to shut down the street? Or is it enough to shut down a business? Or are we really trying to shut down the system of oppression and dehumanization that leads itself to police brutality in the streets? For me, the answer is very clearly the third. And sometimes streets might just get shut down, right? So the role of that is in educating folks, mobilizing folks, and then giving, planning, strategizing in tandem with our community for how do we shut it down together. What was that second part of the question?
So we will now proceed to our pre-written questions, and either of you feel free to respond to any and all of these questions. So the first question is, in these specific cases of Jessie, Hernandez, and Ryan Ronquillo, why do you think that the police officers have violated their initial training? For example, according to the Denver Post, in the past 4 shootings, Denver police officers have shot at moving vehicles. Shooting at a moving vehicle is stated to be against initial training of police officers, including if the officer feels that their life is threatened. So, once again, why do you think that police officers have violated their initial training in these specific cases?
I'm just going to be real with folks. I don't believe that police officers have violated their initial training at all. I believe that we've all initially been trained to view people of color as criminals, as thugs and delinquents. We hear it in our language when we were calling folks illegal aliens. So people aren't illegal, right? We hear in our language, we hear people called thugs. We are quickly to refer to folks as criminals off that. You know, if this person hadn't been stealing cigarillos or hadn't been, and they stole his car, then perhaps like this person would be alive. Like, you know, it damages my soul, but from time to time I read the comments, right? You know, folks who love me have told me to cut that out. But but I don't think that police have been violating their initial training at all. It's the initial training that we have all been inculcated with. I would imagine that folks in this room who are concerned with justice have maybe crossed the street at an individual that, you know, at a certain point in time or saw a group of black folks and was a little scared about it. Right, that's the initial training. Right, just because you got a badge or just because you're in a uniform doesn't negate that initial training that you got to begin with. And so there's no wonder why folks haven't gotten indicted. There's no wonder why folks haven't been criminalized, because that's the, like, that was their training. That's what they were trained to do. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, I agree with everything Jamoke said. Speaking specifically to Denver, though, in terms of this policy that they claim to have of not shooting into moving vehicles and doing so anyways, I think that reflects a longer history, not just in Denver, like we're talking about Denver specifically right now, but of the police having zero accountability, none at all. They can do whatever they want. Shoot first, ask questions later. Or don't ask questions later, just keep shooting people. And the city will keep paying out millions upon millions of dollars every year for use of force complaints and not fire those officers, not even think about prosecuting them, keeping them on the streets, because Denver's got plenty of money. We can pay out, and you know, as many use of force complaints come our way, we can keep paying them. And so what if our cops aren't following their training, or are following their training? Maybe they're just telling us that they're not. I don't know. You know, I think it reflects a total lack of care, because they know they're not going to face any consequences for it. So they're going to do whatever they want because they can get away with it. And the decades of the Denver District Attorney has not prosecuted a police officer for any sort of on-the-job use of force or killing since 1992. So, I mean, I was born in 1993, so that's 23 years that a police officer hasn't faced prosecution in this city. So why would you change what you were doing? If you can keep getting away with it, it makes your job easier. You don't have to go testify in court and kill that person.
Our next question is, what are some changes you believe should be made to the recruitment and training of police officers?
Jamoke got real last time, so I'll get real this time. I'm in favor of the total disbandment of every police force in this country. And I don't see anything that can be done in terms of recruitment or training that would fix this. You know, people say that's a pie-in-the-sky dream, but, you know, Rolling Stone's printing articles about 9 alternatives to the police, so I don't think it's that unrealistic. You know, I mean, all the work that I do and that my organization works to do is building strong communities that don't need the police. And that, you know, that comes from a banner that was in Oakland. People shut down the police department there. And I don't think that's an unrealistic goal. I don't think it's unrealistic that we could live in a world without police.
Dude. I heard it said in a public meeting by, again, and I would have to follow up on this, but I heard someone talk about the history of policing in this country. And there was a point at which that we did not police as heavily in this country, particularly in certain areas. Particularly like in slavery days, like there weren't as many like police forces like on the ground because most of those folks were slave catchers. Right? Like, and that was what was like policing in that day. Wear your papers, where you headed to, that sort of stuff. But as we got into like Jim Crow era and Reconstruction and Jim Crow era, we see like the advent of like more modern policing in this country, just historically. So for me, it's not hard to imagine not having policing, and especially not in the iteration that we're experiencing now in this day and age. It was not always so. I don't think there's anything we can do better in terms of recruitment and training of officers. I wish you would.
What kind of support or forms of solidarity do you believe are most important to see from the greater Denver community and the Regis University community?
Support. I was speaking with a good friend of mine, and he was recently talking to me from his faith tradition around what his faith tradition calls when you see injustice. And one of the things he said to me was, in his faith tradition, when you see injustice, that you have a responsibility to work against it first with your hands, to do something about it, right? To use your body to stop that injustice, whether that's standing in the way, picking something up, doing something. He then said, if you can't do that, if you can't muster the courage, or if you're physically unable, or if you, for whatever reason, you can't do it with your hands, then your second responsibility to work against injustice is with your mouth, is with your voice, to say something against it, to protest, to say this is wrong, I disagree, right? But if you can't muster that up, if you can't with your mouth speak out against it, if you can't say this is wrong, I disagree, for whatever reasons, your mouth don't work, or you can't work up the courage, at the very least, you have to work against it in your heart. Right? When you see injustice or hear of injustice, at least your face should change. Like at the very least, like it should sit wrong with you. And that was pointed to me, because I think that our communities have done a whole bunch of step 2 of the protesting, of the speaking out against and saying this is wrong, but we haven't really started at step 1 in terms of doing something about it. It's not really resistance if you had to get a permit. It's hard for me to go to another pointless protest, and maybe it's not pointless. I would rather folks stay woke than stay home. So I'm happy that folks are up off the couch protesting and saying something about it. But I'm more interested in the conversation of doing something with our hands. We live in a college town. Or maybe, I don't know how we have lots of universities and colleges in a localized radius. And most of the movements that I've studied and looked at in this country, like college students were metaphorically, figuratively up in arms, right? Out in these streets. Out not just saying something about it, but doing something about it. Many of our communities we're already at risk. It's already unsafe. Not far from where I grew up, a 6-year-old girl was shot in her sleep. It's already unsafe out here, but if you want to stand with me, then literally stand with me, come out here and put yourselves in places where it's not only is it already unsafe, but unfortunately it's too comfortable. So if you want to stand with us or stand in solidarity on this issue, then we have to remove the veneer of safety and step into some uncomfortable places. I have some ideas for what that looks like, and I would love for folks to come talk to me, but I'm just not going to, on a public forum, put that out there.
I think it is important to make a distinction between support and solidarity. There's lots of ways to support. Every time I me or someone you know or a Facebook page you follow asks for money, give whatever you can, or repost it, or both. You know, because we are doing this work with these families, or to raise legal funds for people who have been arrested because of their resistance. I think that's a really important form of support. I think solidarity means you know, going to court with people who have been arrested through the struggle against police brutality when they have court. I think it means showing up for marches. I think it means showing up for events like this, you know, especially if you're not getting extra credit or your professor made you go. And I think it means talking to people and being involved outside of Regis. I think everyone's heard of like the Camp Regis bubble, and it's really easy to stay here and stay on campus and join groups and do social justice work on campus. But I also think it's important to recognize that we live in Denver. You know, even if you live in a dorm, you still live in Denver. And the police that show up to bust up your party on Friday night is the second deadliest police force in the country. And then if the only time you're saying, fuck the cops, all that stuff, is on Friday night because they took your cake away, that's a real big problem. And I think being in solidarity, you know, that's the first step. You gotta recognize that the police don't exist to issue noise complaints. The police exist to protect and defend the property of the rich and to keep working people and people of color in their place, so to speak. And so I think realizing this is an issue in the city that you live in, even if you don't feel like you live in it, it's a big deal that people have to live with every single day.
Our final question is, what is something you want people to realize about police brutality and also to take away from this conversation?
I'm looking around the room at folks who have heard what you're ready to say. I want people to realize that police brutality is a symptom of a much larger issue. I've got to be honest that I'm not a reformist and never have been. I don't believe that it's possible for police to have accountability. I believe police accountability is an oxymoron. I don't believe that the police can be any more accountable for their actions than a hammer can. And I'm not interested in fuck the hammer. I'm not interested in asking the hammer to feel badly about itself or to hammer differently. I'm interested in my communities not getting hammered anymore. I'm not interested in asking slave catchers to be more humane slave catchers. So for me, if we're going at police reform, or if we're going particularly at police brutality head on, then that's like giving our communities a tissue for the flu. And yes, our communities need some tissue, absolutely. You know, you have the flu, you might need some tissue. But I'm really more concerned with addressing the flu like the flu. And for me, that is a system that is built upon slavery, continuing slavery. And that's not hyperbole. That is clearly outlined in the 13th Amendment. That in the case of punishment for criminal activity, slavery has not been fully abolished in this country. Please, I implore you to look it up. Slavery has not been abolished in this country. And so that to me, that really outlines why thug became the new nigger. That really outlines why we criminalize people based upon their country of origin. It really outlines why we can have arguments. Again, you know, if this person had just been on the right side of the law, then we wouldn't have treated them like a slave. Meaning, if they'd still be alive, we wouldn't have killed them without any reprimand. Like, we wouldn't have killed them without any consequence. We wouldn't be locking them up and throwing away the key to profit off the fact that their bodies are there, like slaves. They'd still have the right to vote. They'd still be citizens if they weren't slaves. So again, what I would like people to realize about police brutality is that it's not a policing issue. It's quite frankly an abolition movement. And if we're really serious about freedom, about folks being free and no slavery, no exceptions, then yes, our communities need some tissue, and we need some folks working on that. In the meantime, I don't want one more of our babies to die in the streets. But our analysis has to be a little bit deeper about exactly the issue that we're facing. It has to go farther than like, fuck you because you wear the uniform. And I have friends in here who feel that way. and I love you all, so please don't hate me. But it has to go a little bit farther than ignoring the problem altogether as well, right? Because we do have a deeper issue in this country. So.
Something I wanted people to realize about police brutality. Yeah, I mean, yeah, agree with Jumoke. I think it's really, or it's not easy, but it's easier to say, oh, well, if we just get body cameras in all the cops. Oh, we just put dash cams in every car. You know, Eric Garner in New York, his murder was filmed. You can see the whole thing, and it's on YouTube, it's everywhere. You can see the whole process from beginning to end, and that cop still got off. You know, I don't put a lot of faith in these measures that are just gonna, that keep the police around. I think they're tissues. I think they're important, but that's not the end-all be-all of it for me. If tomorrow every police officer in the United States had a body camera that couldn't be shut off and that ran the whole time they were on their job, I would still want all of them to lose their jobs. And frankly, there's nothing they can do that's going to change that. I mean, they could all walk around wearing white painter suits and have no weapons and no handcuffs, and as long as they were enforcing laws and targeting people of color, I would still want them all gone. So I think police brutality is a symptom of this country not respecting, seeing no place for people of color and for poor people in this country. And the police are there to remind them of that every single day. And sometimes it's just following them through their neighborhood because they think their car's too nice. And sometimes it's shooting them and killing them.
Thank you both very much for everything you've shared with us tonight. This formally concludes the panel portion of tonight's event. And once again, on behalf of the Social Justice and Spirituality Committee, I would really like to thank you all for your participation. And we would like to invite those who would like to stay for a small group discussion to find the following faculty. So Dr. Brian Jarecki and Dr. Damian Thompson. They're back there. And they will decide together if they'll do a small group together for those who'd like to stay, or smaller ones apart. So once again, thank you so much. Our next event that we have is next Tuesday. It will be a screening of a documentary of Tania Valenzuela. She is an alum of Regis University. She graduated in 2011. She is undocumented, and her mother is currently facing the proceedings for deportation. And this documentary just really shows the raw footage of her life and experience. That will be next Tuesday at 7 p.m. in the Science Amphitheater, and we'd love to have you. So once again, thank you very much. And if you'd like to stay for small group discussions, see Damien and Brian.
Good, how are you doing?
Hello? So Connor and I actually just agreed that we are open to questions. If folks have any questions they would like to ask of us, feel free.
If you'll just raise your hand, we'll pass the mic around. Questions, comments. If you need to leave, that's totally understandable. Any questions?
Thank you guys so much. That was awesome. I have a question about networking in Denver. Being relatively new here, having gone to Creating Change and meeting some folks, but there's no, every city I've lived in, there's been a group that's the group, and here it seems like there's a lot of kind of quiet campus activity, which is great, and there are those protesting permits, and I'm not a fan of those either. So how do you two recommend folks who aren't in college being involved in this and knowing what's going on? You can get on Twitter all day and search Black Lives Matter in other cities. It's not happening in Denver. So what do you guys think?
That's a painful question to hear. I guess this is the part where I plug my organization. I'm a member of Denver Freedom Riders, which is a network of folks who are interested, particularly in the Black Lives Matter movement and its intersections with police brutality, police accountability, and mass incarceration. We've been doing some work on the ground, and you can join us on Facebook, but also, because I feel really uncomfortable plugging my own organization as itself, there's a huge network of activism going on in Denver, a large history of activism going on in Denver. Many of whom are in this room. Folks who represent many of those organizations around police accountability, around immigrant rights, around you name it. We're here. In terms of networking, how would you say and I'm gonna open this up to the folks I know in the audience. I guess there isn't a central hub for hey, I'm interested in justice, give me a call. Go to protest. Go to one of those protests with permits. Some of them don't. Many of them don't. And make friends. Have those conversations. I would say that's probably the best way to network in Denver. It is happening, it's happening often. Come touch base with me and I will connect you to many of the folks who are in this room who are leading a lot of that themselves. Let's make it happen, because I want to make sure that, again, you'll hear me say this a lot, I want people to stay woke and not stay home. And wherever that is, whatever issue that is that excites you, I'm just happy you're off your couch.
I have a shameless plug. So Denver Community Defense, one of our projects that we have every week, Sunday at 12:30, is Coffee Not Cops. It has its own Facebook page. You can go on Facebook. I'm sure we're probably the only group that uses that language on Facebook. So if you just search Coffee Not Cops, it's free coffee, 12:30 every Sunday, and it's and the location gets announced on Saturdays, because now that it's nice, we're doing it outside. And so that is tons of people from all sorts of different groups in Denver. And we have literature and free coffee and usually bumping some pretty good music. And it's fun. You get to hang out and meet a lot of people that way.
Okay, wait, I have a response to that question as well. Whatever issue you're really passionate about, there is an organization or there is a group of people that are organizing it around it. And so yeah, if you'd like to have more of one-on-one conversation, I'm really involved in immigrant rights community, as well as racial justice, police brutality. So it's kind of dip in many different things and wear different hats, but it really is all for the same thing. If we don't get it, shut it down. So yeah, just talk to any one of us and we can give you so many networks that way.
Hi, I don't know if they said this, but Denver Action Network too, they do a lot of great things, and they send like text updates too. So they'll tell you about protests that are going on. But one thing I just want to say is like volunteer, like just go out and just meet people like they were saying. I think that's the best way to network. Celeste does great work with Centro Humanitario, and I work with Servicios de la Raza, and they're always telling me, I mean, Cesar Chavez March was this past weekend, and they're great people out there doing great work and getting help to people who need it. But I had a question for you guys, and thank you for coming here tonight. I really appreciate everything you had to say, and I think it's really valuable for us as students to hear it. You know, you said use your body, and get yourself in the way of things that are happening. And I guess, you know, my question is, how do we acknowledge the moments that we need to use our body? And even if we don't have courage, maybe even like a little bit of stupidity, just kind of throw ourselves in there, you know, and say, this is what's right to do. And I don't know, what if Connor, I've talked to you about the situations when he was down there, but I guess I'd just like to hear stories about when you realize those situations, how do you acknowledge that that's what's happening and then just become a part of it?
A disclaimer. There's also like some positionality stuff there that has to be addressed. I would not, I'm loath to tell anybody that you can't be part of the struggle, because there are ways for you to be part of the struggle. But I also want to iterate that there are correct ways, there are appropriate ways to be part of the struggle. We have to find ways to let people of color, not let people of color, make space for people of color to lead in this. And so for me, I can't speak for every person of color either, but so for me, Jumoke and me speaking on behalf of myself, when it comes time to be out in the streets with a purpose, with a strategy, with a plan, when it pops off, we are going to need college students, folks in suits, faith leaders, clergy leaders, young folks, putting themselves in a place that flips the narrative on its head, where, you know, young white boy with dreads who's in college is out there on the front lines. They're like, you know, that doesn't look like a criminal to me, right? They can write me off with my college education, with my professional career, with me being a loving father, and my hat turned backwards and my pants sagging on purpose. But they're going to write me off and say, well, yeah, we expect that they're criminals, right? But for the folks who aren't going to get that stamp immediately, that is the way narrative changes. That's the way heart changes. That's the way that we bring the fight to the system as opposed to bringing the fight to individuals. So that is my answer for when the moment is right, you will know it because we'll be leading you.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with that. Like, just an anecdote from when I got arrested, it was pretty well documented in the press before the fact that there were going to be demonstrations at the Parade of Lights, and in no small part because I wore a Regis hoodie and sat on the sidewalk for an hour before the parade even started, I was able to walk past 2 police officers to block the route. If I had maybe looked like Jamoke or been wearing something that wasn't, you know, nice khaki pants and a Regis hoodie, but it would have been tackled the minute my foot hit the pavement by those 2 police officers, who instead just kind of stared really confusedly as I walked past them in the middle of the street. So yeah, I mean, I think it is about, and we talked about this at demonstrations that don't have permits, and that we know there's a level of risk involved just being where you are and standing where you are, that I'm willing to go to jail before an undocumented person goes to jail, or before somebody with kids goes to jail. And that means physically putting myself in between them and the police. If the police try to come into the march, I'm gonna step forward and be there first. And it's not always like that. You know, there's other ways to be an ally, because the cops aren't on us all the time. But when they are, it's about stepping up and protecting people who, because of the way our society is structured, are way more vulnerable. You know, I went to jail for a few hours and got bailed out and got to go back at 3 in the morning and go to sleep in my bed. If that had been somebody without papers, they would have been deported, separated from their family.
Okay, and also to speak to that question, I think, especially in any sort of like taking the streets or like nonviolent action, whatever it is for you, being very self-aware of who you are. At least for me, in my participation, I am a Chicana woman. I'm a brown woman, and that puts me at a certain position of vulnerability. Like, yes, I'm from this country, but that's not the way that I'm always viewed, especially by police. So it's like being very real about the situation that you're in, and it's okay to be afraid. It's okay to like take streets and like go to protests or take action and not feel completely safe, because the reality is we're not completely safe, whether or not we're at a protest or we're here at Regis or anywhere, really. We know that Denver right now is unsafe. But when I have people as allies and as true allies who are literally willing to put their body before mine because they understand that I feel uncomfortable to a certain extent or that I feel afraid, that is what it's really about. And that is the power of embodiment in taking action, like using our hands. You know, how can we use our hands to build something or to take it down, deconstruct it? You know, how can we like use our own body, not just as a symbol, but as a form of action? So that's what I would say to that as well.
I just kind of wanted to respond a little bit to that as well. And there's a lot of talk, I think, tonight and in lots of conversations like this about how to use your body in solidarity in the moment of action. But I think it's good for especially for white folks or folks who hold certain levels of privilege as they move through the world, to think about how to use your body in solidarity in your day-to-day living. When you walk down the street and you see cops on the block that have some kids sitting on the sidewalk in handcuffs, use your privilege in that moment to lose that privilege, right? To dismantle that system. As a white person or someone who holds a visible privilege, you're a lot less likely to get involved, for the cops to get involved with you when you're watching what they're doing, right? So there have been a lot of times, not like I'm trying to toot my horn, but more give an idea, like I pulled my car over, parked my car and walked over somewhere and been late to somewhere else I was supposed to be. Because when I see cops harassing kids outside of East High School, I'm gonna pull over my car, I'm gonna watch that. I'm gonna walk over, I'm gonna interact with the police, I'm gonna say, hey, what you doing over here? And it's not just about what you're doing in the moments of action when there's something planned. Think about how to operate in your day-to-day life in ways that are constantly deconstructing and tearing that down. And I don't mean tear it down and leave it that way, but tear it down and let's all build something really fucking badass together.
I actually want to say something too. It's hard. We talked about it, and I think to relate a bit more about it when he was talking about how we have built this system because of these stereotypes and generalizations we put on people, or our society has. We allow it to continue by helping break those stereotypes in our day-to-day lives. We can start this progression because if someone, like too many times have I been confused for an illegal immigrant and been told to go to Mexico where I belong. If somebody else, if I say something to them, they're not gonna listen. They're gonna be like, oh, you know nothing. But if somebody else is to step up, as well as me, and educate them they might start thinking about what they're thinking or they're saying. Any questions?
No. This is an option.
Oh yeah. It was mostly a softball for you guys. Thank you for teaching me tonight. I'd like to say that. Like, I think that's not recognized enough how much we teach each other. So I'd like to thank you both for teaching me something tonight. And one thing that just really blew my mind, I'm not gonna lie about it, when you guys were like, get rid of the police force, right? That totally blew my mind. So it led to my question, my thought process being, what does that look like when that's gone? You know what I mean? Help those of us who just blew our mind, like, see that.
Okay, yeah. Example A, Costa Rica, no military, no police force. They do have people wearing like white jumpsuits basically at the airport to scan your passport. That's pretty much it. And yeah, I've traveled there. I've traveled a lot of places in the world. I've been very privileged to do that, and I would honestly personally say, not just because I knew that they didn't have a military police force, but I've never felt more safe in any other country than Costa Rica. I've felt more safe in many other countries except for the United States, so let's be real about that. But yeah, so Exhibit A, and there's plenty of resources there. People who did Nobel laureate peace work, worthy, we can talk about it. I can give you resources, like, so I think that's Exhibit A right there, like, it can exist. And the fact that we think that it can't, I think just demonstrates back to this idea that we need to have enslavement in this country to survive. That corporations rather would make $47 plus a day on the head of people in geo-detention center or people in private prisons across this country, especially people of color, than they would let people be free and be who they are. So, yeah, that's what I have to say to that.
I think that at one point, I know this, at one point in this country's history, we were having a conversation about what happens when there are no more prisons, because like there were no, like, the prison population was just that low, and it just wasn't economically feasible. And that wasn't too long ago, I'm talking like the mid-70s. That's not even one old person ago. So that's a piece of it. Like, if we don't have a massive prison industrial complex to fill, then we don't need people employed to fill it. The other piece is I operate counterculturally from a narrative of abundance. I believe that in our communities, in our circles, that we have the resources that we need, not only to survive, but to thrive. I just believe that they are being mismanaged. They aren't being used well. And so we have a police force that exists to fill a need that could be filled in other ways. Right? Currently, the Department of Corrections is the #1 mental health provider in the state of Colorado. Right? There are other ways to deal with that. there are other ways for us to allocate those resources that would be better served. We've got to start teaching our communities of color, don't call the police on your kids because they're acting up, or don't call the police on your family member that has, that is struggling with mental health. That's just not the right outlet for that, and yet we have been trained that those are the folks that we call. I operate from a narrative that says that our children do actually, in fact, want to learn. I have a 6-year-old little girl, and she asks me questions about the world around her all day long. So I know that she's very interested in her education, but it wasn't until I sent her to school that she wasn't interested anymore. Right? And yet, the prison to school pipeline is real. Like, it's a real cycle. And we don't need the police force for that. There are other resources for us to deal with our children, for us to educate our children, for us to take care of them. that exist within our community that we have at our disposal, but we have chosen to allocate those resources into mass incarceration and the prison industrial complex because it makes money in these businesses. So those are some ideas for what that looks like in the abstract in general, and like I'd be willing to write down a platform with folks, or just willing to sit down and create some sort of 10-point plan, wink wink, for us to figure out what that looks like in the concrete. But coming from that narrative of abundance, coming from like that narrative of we all we got and we all we need, I can't believe any other way. I can't believe that that sort of way is impossible. I would love to live in the United States that looks more like Costa Rica, a couple of different levels.
I guess a way to think about what the world would look like without the police is to look at what the police are doing right now. What do they do on an everyday basis? What does a cop do when he gets in his car? And think about how that's different where there are lots of people of color and where there are very few people of color. You go stand on a street corner in Arvada, in a little neighborhood, for 24 hours and see 0 police cars. And I would dare you to find a corner in Park Hill where you could stand for 24 hours and not see any police cars. So it's not just an issue of the police in general, but it's very targeted and specific. The police in Arvada exist to write tickets for speeding and occasionally maybe investigate a murder. But the police in Denver are every day targeting communities of color. Every single day. That's what they do. When they're driving around in District 6 in the Central Business District, they're not looking to stop, someone who works at an oil and gas firm from jaywalking, or to save non-existent kittens from non-existent trees. They're there to make sure that the homeless people aren't sitting in Starbucks for too long. And so I think it's all about, like I said, building community and actually being in community with that homeless person. And making it so if there is some incident, people calling the cops because their neighbor's having a loud party. That's a pretty tame example on any level. Just go over and talk to your neighbor. And college kids who are playing music too loud, when your neighbor is trying to put their kid to sleep, turn your damn music down. Like, respect each other and recognize that you live in a community. And I don't know, I don't see a need for the police then.
I don't think I need that. And it just, what? Oh, I'm sorry.
I wanted to say that South Africa during the apartheid, they had what's called the Magalas. The police no longer helped the people, they were just a repressive force. So they formed committees that were basically restorative justice.
No, you're fine.
That were basically like restorative justice committees. Originally, they were made up of like elders, sort of in a hierarchy, but people, the community respected. Pretty soon, a lot of the youth of apartheid got involved with it. Today, there's still a lot over 400. They call them street committees or people's courts, and they still operate today as an alternative to policing. Rose City, you can look, I'll share a link on the Facebook page for this event, but in Portland, one of the collectives up there came up with a pretty good draft for alternative to policing, and restorative justice is always one of the best ones. Like the guy in the red said, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, the gentleman, but being community and knowing your community, going back to community. And we were all tribal people at one time, and tribal people took care of things within the tribe. Community is no different. But like I said, if you look at the apartheid of what was called metropolis, and they were the community doing their own justice.
Just to actually follow up on that, I think briefly, we haven't mentioned it yet, but it's always the albatross in the room. Actually, there's three. There's patriarchy, there's white supremacy, and there's capitalism. There would be no slavery as an institution didn't exist until capitalism as a mode of production took over the globe. And so the reason why we aren't in community, the reason why we don't participate in restorative justice is because we're all busy trying to earn a paycheck so that we can feed our kids. So, the police force protects the laws and the institutions and the property of the wealthy, and that's based on a system that divides the rich and the poor. So I think, Jamoke talks about that deeper level of analysis, and that includes the personal level of analysis. How do I, in my personal life, perpetuate patriarchy? How do I, in my personal life, by earning a paycheck, perpetuate capitalism? And, we need to start thinking about alternative economic structures in addition to thinking about alternative modes other than the police, because until we can get our economics situated as communities, the police are going to exist because we are kind of beholden to that whole system, the whole apparatus of which the police are one. So they talk about breaking down the system. They're not talking about like just the criminal justice system. They're talking about the whole damn thing from the ground up.
Any more questions? Comments?
All right, well, once again, thank you very much for coming tonight. We really appreciate your presence, and our next event, once again, is on Tuesday in the Science Amphitheater, the screening of Tanya Marnarka from 7 to 9 p.m. So, yeah, thank you. Let's all give each other a round of applause.